Have you ever watched a TV show or a movie where there's a villain that you watch for so long that you actually kind of end up liking them, and in certain situations you even root for them? I think something like that's happening right now, and it's kind of like a Snape Harry Potter situation, because the Canadian government recently made a new law to help a long-standing Canadian industry that's currently struggling and struggling badly. But in doing so, they might have actually just put the nail in the coffin of that industry altogether. The thing that they thought would save them might just be the final dagger, a total backfire. And it could have a major impact on every single Canadian because some of these changes will impact what you're able to see and, as a result, what you end up thinking. I'm talking about an industry that you might have a lot of opinions on, and that's Canadian news media. In short, it's failing, and it's failing in a big way. Here we've got Bell laying off around 1,300 people, largely from their media staff. The Bell owns CTV. We've also got Post Media laying off 11% of its editorial staff. This is organizations like National Post, Financial Post, the Vancouver Sun, Toronto Sun, these news organizations. Everyone is laying off a ton of their staff because these businesses aren't making enough money anymore. They are failing. Because the dominant money-making part of this whole news business is selling advertisements. And in the digital age, the businesses have been seeing these advertising dollars absolutely dwindle, and it makes a lot more sense once you see this. I promise it's gonna make a lot more sense once I explain this one thing. This chart is from 2020, but it still applies today, if not even more so. When we look at the digital advertising revenue that's made in Canada, about 50% of all of that revenue from digital advertising is made by Google, about 33% Facebook, or now Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, and all the others wrapped in there make only 17% of the pie. And this is where the story takes two different paths depending on the way that you look at it. We don't know exactly how this happened. Either news businesses teamed up and went to the government and said, hey, come on, man. I mean, look at how much money that they're making and that we used to make. Don't you think that you should pass a law to make it so that we get a bigger piece of this pie like we used to? Maybe that happened, or perhaps the government just thought themselves like, hey, if we make these news media organizations more profitable, maybe it can increase our bottom line when it comes to federal tax revenues. Either way, the government decided, hey, we're going to put forward a new law that changes this pie and forces these major players to pay up. And the result of that is a bill that was heavily debated but finally got through the House of Commons and through the Senate and came into effect about a month ago. It's called Bill C-18. Take a look at it. It's an interesting bill in the way that it tries to actually make this happen. The bill's called an Act Respecting Online Communication Platforms that Make News Content Available to Persons in Canada. Essentially just saying social media places where links are shared to news content. It's a long, dense bill, but I'll give you the Coles notes right now. Essentially, this bill says it's not fair that Google and Meta or Facebook allow users to post links to news articles without Google and Meta, the platforms, paying the news companies when users click on those shares of the news posts. Since users scroll through the tech platforms to find their news instead of scrolling through a random website like the globeandmail.com or cbc.com or something like that, the tech platforms actually get the lion's share of the ad revenue. They get more views on their ads because the place that people are scrolling to find the news ends up being more profitable than the ads that are served to them when they actually click through to a link and go to the website to read the article. So this bill requires that Facebook and Google and platforms like this have to bargain with these individual news companies to figure out a fair rate per click. And if they don't figure out this fair rate per click and make their own agreements, this bill gives the government the power to impose a rate on them. And this is the part where things really start blowing up in their face, because in response to this, Google and Facebook essentially said, well, we don't really like the fact, Canada, that you as a government are giving yourselves the power to impose a fee on us, an arbitrary fee that's paid to news companies every time a link is clicked on. So instead, we're just gonna stop letting Canadian users share and view news content on our platforms. No more Canadian news on Google or Facebook. That should solve the problem, right? From these platforms' perspectives, this should be the solution. If news companies think that Facebook and Google are stealing their advertising dollars by exploiting their content and having links to their content on their platforms, well then the platforms will just stop using the content. Then whatever pay-per-click rate is imposed on them, they won't have to pay. That is where both the Minister of Culture in Canada, Pablo Rodriguez, or at least it was Pablo Rodriguez, now it's a new person, and potentially the news media lobbyists who could have pushed for this bill, this is where both of those people are saying, oh shit, we might have messed this up in a bad way.
All Canadians want, is for these platforms to contribute their fair share, not more, not less, just what's fair. Facebook has decided to be unreasonable, irresponsible, and started blocking news. This is why, today, we are announcing the Government of Canada will be suspending advertising on Facebook and Instagram.
So the government's saying to these tech platforms, you guys are just being unreasonable bullies here. Just let us make you prop up our failing news industry. And since you're saying you won't, we're going to pull all of our government advertising from your platforms. Take that. That'll show you. But ultimately, this punishment pretty much means nothing to these companies. Facebook made just under $120 billion last year. That means that the $10 million in ads that the Canadian government spent last year only accounted for about 0.008% of their total profit. Absolute peanuts to these big platforms. And right now, both sides just think that the other side is bluffing. The Canadian government thinks that the tech platforms will eventually give up and pay the fee because they agreed to something similar in Australia, who tried to implement something like this a little while earlier. And the tech companies know that if they follow through on removing Canadian news from their platforms, that eventually the Canadian government will have to backtrack on this new law. Listen to this clip.
These platforms are the best on-ramp to news that we have found, and we have tested many. Today, Google and Facebook combined generate almost 50% of our traffic on an ongoing basis.
That clip was from a Senate hearing where they were studying this bill, and that guy's from Village News, or Village Media, which is a news organization in Canada, and he claims that, at least for his organization, the fact that news is shared on Facebook and Google results, that means that they get double the amount of traffic on their news website, which also means that they should get roughly double the ad revenue that they would have gotten if there weren't these links shared on the platforms. And it's clear that news companies know this too. Otherwise, why would they have accounts on every single different social media platform with the sole focus of sharing their articles? Here we have the Globe and Mail. They want people to click on these links and to follow through so that they get those advertising dollars. They want news to be shared on these platforms so they get more traffic. There is, of course, the argument to be made that before these platforms existed, news companies had far more revenue because users had to actually navigate to their websites and scroll through their headlines, and these platforms have taken away that ability, and as a result, it's taken away the ad revenue that was generated from doing that. And even though Google and Facebook have largely taken over the distribution of this news, I think that a pay-per-click solution that's imposed on the platform that is one of the only reasons you still have any revenue doesn't really seem like an appropriate solution for the digital age. So if these platforms follow through on this major threat of delisting any news that's shared, any Canadian news that's shared, the already struggling news companies could lose half of their ad revenue just like that. And if it happens, it could mean even more negative consequences for average Canadians. Like, think of if they ban news sites from being shared, the only news content that would be on these platforms would be coming from potentially less credible sources, ones that aren't linked to major news outlets, leaving only blogs and perhaps videos like this one as the only way that Canadians can get their news through social media. Now, I'm not knocking the value of independent journalism and videos created like this on different platforms, and I'm also not saying that news companies themselves are ethical or have perfect unbiased journalism, actually far from the fact, but I do think that it's important that they remain as an element of, or one of many elements of how we actually consume our news. And I think all of this leads to the question, who's actually responsible for making news media profitable? Shouldn't they be taking some responsibility on themselves to update their business models and lean into new profit areas and profit avenues that embrace the current landscape? They certainly should be doing those things, but that would require a lot of hard work and forward thinking, and those are two qualities that aren't often found in mammoth-sized aging businesses, right? It's far easier to lobby the government with your current connections so that you can force the profitable companies to take a dollar and throw it in your beggar's cup. On the other side, however, I do fear the increasing power of these platforms like Facebook and Google and YouTube and the control that they have over advertising dollars. Because they own the platforms through which these ads are served, they have total control over their share of what of the value that's generated by users that are making content, right? Like I know the share of of sharing platform fees like that. Of every dollar of advertising revenue that is created from one of these YouTube videos that I make, I only see about 55% of that, 55 cents on the dollar, while Google or YouTube takes 45 cents of every dollar created from ads that are served on these videos, right? I don't think that that's a great deal for the creator, but oddly enough, that's actually one of the highest rates for creator amongst all of the other platforms. So there are some problems there. But at the end of the day, I think we're just going to have to wait and see which side breaks first. Is it going to be the social media platforms, or is it going to be the Canadian government? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that this is the right way to go? Maybe to make sure that Canadian news continues by getting money from these big tech giants, or do you think there's another way forward? I'm curious what you think. Leave me a comment. I read every single one and try to get back to as many as I possibly can. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel so you can keep posted on this and other Canadian focused content. I think there's not enough of that on the platform, so if you want to support that, a quick free subscribe would be greatly appreciated. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.